Hi, my name is Shady Atia, Professor of Sustainable Architecture and Building Technology at Liège University in Belgium, and I'm going to talk today about focus group discussions. Well, this is a presentation as part of a playlist on qualitative research methods. Don't hesitate to watch previous videos on different qualitative research methods, and this presentation is a follow-up for these presentations. In order to present you this presentation, I need to first explain that there is two major types of research methodologies. The quantitative research methodologies, where we look at modeling, empirical, experimental approaches, or we do qualitative approaches, where we are looking at different methods to work on systematic reviews, content analysis, observation, in-depth interviews, and focus group usability, case studies, sketching, and so on. This presentation is a follow-up on different previous presentations, and it will be focused mainly on the focus group discussion. And don't forget that next to those two major methodology, we can use the mixed approach, where we combine some methods from the qualitative world with some methods from the quantitative world. Now, when we talk about qualitative research, where is the focus group discussion falling on? It is mainly falling on the population side, because when we do focus group discussion, we are mainly dealing with people. For sure, we will need earlier a literature review to identify our research question and research scope, but focus group discussions are mainly dealing with people. Well, the audience of my focus group discussion, the audience of this presentation is mainly researchers who are preparing a research thesis, dissertation, or conference or journal publication. And the content of the presentation will be mainly on how to conduct a research design, how to design my methodology, how to do my sampling, how to analyze data, how to address validity, and what are the takeaway messages from this presentation. Well, let's start with the introduction. What is focus group discussions? A focus group is a common qualitative research technique used to understand feelings, meanings, interpretation of a selected group of people. A focus group typically consists of a small number of participants, usually around 6 to 12. Why do we do focus group discussions? We interact with the participants, ask follow-up questions to probe more deeply. It allows us to have the ability of grouping participants to interact with each other. It's not only with us and the people, it's also the people among them regarding a specific topic. We benefit from the group dynamics that will result in more in-depth discussion, and it allows us to have the ability to use non-verbal behavior during the conversation and during the discussion, and it generates much information in a short time. Later on, when I transcribe this content, I can do content analysis and get a deeper understanding. Now, when do we do focus group discussions? When we ask questions that cannot be easily asked or answered in a written surveys. When I have a limitation of my survey and I cannot find answer, I'm looking for open-ended questions that provides more insights, then I need to use the focus group discussion. Also, it supplements the knowledge gained from a survey, so it can be complementary to a survey. It doesn't need to be a survey or a focus group discussion. It can be both, depending on the situation. And it develops a survey, but there is insufficient when you develop a survey and you have insufficient knowledge about the topic. So you can do focus group discussion to learn also from the invited people and the experts, especially when there is a knowledge gap. What are the types of focus group discussion? Mainly mini focus groups, Delphi method focus groups, dual moderator focus group, and remote focus group. In this presentation, I'm going to talk about mini focus group because it's the most common way of doing focus group discussions. And the following common method is called the Delphi method. If you are interested, just comment in the video today and write that you are interested in the Delphi method, and then maybe later on I will make a video for the Delphi method. And by that, these are the most two common approaches to do this focus group discussion. There are some principles you need to know when you do focus group discussions. It's not aimed at reaching a consensus on the discussed issue. That's not the point. It is more encouraging people to have a range of responses. So that's one of the important principles. It must be conducted by a moderator, and this moderation task requires asking questions and creating a conversation together with participants. Preferably, the moderator is not you if you are conducting this research as a principal investigator. You will have to have simulating your interactions. You need to assure the sticking to the subject. All these are the roles of the moderator. The moderator will make sure that there is a flow. It will make sure that we are sticking to the question, respecting the time. There is interaction, there is no silence, and people are respectfully allowed to express their opinion. Now, these are the success criteria for focus group discussion. First of all, specificity. So the information that is specific to the participant's experience. You cannot get people, ask them in a context of a focus group discussion about something or about topics that they are not aware about or they are unable to provide any expertise or provide any opinion about. Also the range, the issues relevant to the research question, but also unexpected or anticipated issues. So you need to make sure that the range of your questions and the range of the discussion that you will have during the focus group will be related to your specific research question. Then the depths, you need to foster interaction, enhanced exploration of participants' perspective in depth, and that's the major role of a moderator. If you are briefing a moderator from day one, you tell her or tell him that this is the major important thing here. Foster deep interaction and deep sharing of knowledge. And number 4, the personal context is very important. You need to take into account the personal context of the people. And this is part of the success criteria. Well, how to conduct the research design? How can I create my methodology for my focus group discussions? First of all, you need to have a theoretical framework, and focus group discussion under the social constructivism is simply there is no objective reality. We always claim that there is no objective reality, and therefore we are seeking understanding from others. Also, the observations are influenced by own experiences and relations and culture, which makes focus group discussion by excellence a subjective research approach, and the outcomes are subjective. Language plays an important role in the construction of your own reality, and it's very important to take all that into account. You have to be aware of your own ideas. You must review the literature and identify the knowledge gap beforehand in order to come up with your research questions. Now, how to plan my focus group? How can I start? I need to develop a time management plan. I need to have a recruiting strategy, how I'm going to recruit the people, decide on the group composition, who is coming to attend, decide on how many focus groups I will have or I will need in order to come up with a report that makes sense. I have to decide on the location, the venue, and all the logistics associated. I have to develop a topic guide and a question, and I'm going to go into detail in this item in the following slides. And I need to decide about the use of stimulus material. Also, I will explain that in detail. And finally, I have to define the role of the moderator before starting my work, and I also explain that into detail. So let's start with developing a topic guide and questions. How to do that? These are actually the 8 steps that you need to take into account when you plan your focus group discussion. Well, to develop a topic guide and a question, I need to have, first of all, an opening. I need to get people to talk. After that, I can do an introductory, I can introduce the topic, I can get people thinking, connect with the topic, and then I can move to the transition where I have a conversation into the key questions that I have prepared to guide the whole study. Now, the key questions, those that are driving the study, should be proposed after the transition, and finally I end up the focus group discussion by bringing the close, and that has to be done by asking, what is the most important thing we talked about today? Have you missed anything? Can you summarize? Is this the adequate summary that I'm proposing? And by that, this is the guide during the focus group discussion that can you follow to make sure that you have a good structure of your focus group discussion. Now also you have to look at the questions. So your questions need to be clear, one-dimensional. You need to use open-ended questions, not yes and no questions. What do you think about this? You need to avoid everything related to yes, no. I said that. Use the think back questions. Take people back to a certain experience and tell them, when you were doing this in certain time, can you tell us how did you feel? How did you experience that? Tell us how was this situation? Take them back. Ask to give examples, always to make things more concrete for clarification. Avoid why questions, because this is imposing a defensive approach, cause effect, and that's something you should avoid. Just ask them about the what, because you want to understand. And if you have a why, it should be in an in-depth interview, not in a focus group discussion. Ask general questions before specific ones to make sure that you have positive information before having any negative question. Also, as part of your questions development, you have to look at questions that are strategically positioned to address the behaviors, what are the person has done or what they are doing, what are their opinions, their values, their feelings, their knowledge about something, their sensory, what people have seen, touched, heard, and some background demographics. You will need also to have some questions to identify your audience. So maybe you can make in the beginning, before the focus group discussion, a little survey to identify mainly these background and demographic information, and or do it online before they come, so that you can characterize the people, and then the questions should be based and discussed during the focus group discussion based on these major components, if they are relevant to you. Now, after developing my topic guide and my questions, how can I decide about the use of stimulus? I need to always use a stimulus material during my focus group discussion. For example, you can use cartoons, games, flip chart, newspapers, headlines, short stories. This is called stimulus. Why should I use a stimulus during the focus group discussion? You use the stimulus as an icebreaker. You use it to stimulate the discussion. You use it, for example, to research about a certain topic. And in this sense, it's very important while you are designing your focus group discussion to have some stimulus. A flip chart to allow people to interact. You can give them a graphic. If you have a projector, you show them a video, you show them a film, you take them in a short clip, a video or something. You distribute something, some document, a flyer, a newspaper, a controversial statement, and from there you keep things active and you have a stimuli, and then you start directly or indirectly to engage them into the topic, and later on you can pose your questions and you move them now to the transition point where you come up with the questions. Now, what is the last step here? The role of the moderator. The role of the moderator to have adequate knowledge about the project, very important. Able to encourage all members to participate, exhibit empathy and respect, but maintain control. Be open to critique, be non-judgmental about the responses of participants, having a good listening and observation skill, able to encourage group members to discuss in greater detail and make sure that everybody is able to contribute and will be listened and nobody is overtaking the word from somebody else. Also, the role of the moderator is to allow the session to flow through smoothly, ask everyone to say their name every time they participate or when they start to talk, or even make some badges on the tables. Keep the discussion on track, introduce the conversation, don't let people divert from your topic, ask the questions, evaluate the answers, and the moderator is a professional job today. If it's possible, you get somebody with experience to your work as a moderator, and preferably be somebody who did it before. If you are the first time you're doing a focus group discussion, preferably you are not recommended to do it yourself. Also, the role of the moderator is to recruit an assistant, and this assistant moderator will take notes, because you need to take notes. For sure, this assistant moderator also will ensure taping, recording, assist the moderator by checking if any key issues are overlooked, and towards the end of the focus group, the moderator will ask the note taker if there's any issues which have not been discussed, or if there's any questions to be discussed. So this is part of the moderation part. Don't forget to record the whole focus group discussion so that you have the manuscript. You can after transcribe it in your text, taking notes, recording, depending on the devices. So you can have a memo log and you can have a recording device, and by that you can have an idea on the planning of your focus group. So these are the major steps in detail. From now on, you can start your focus group. You can begin. You welcome people, give them the overview, give them the ground rules, start your questions, and keep it moving. Now your focus group is running. Well, now this was about how to design my focus group and how to plan it. Now, how can I sample? I want to go more into detail with sampling. The idea with sampling and recruiting people for your focus group discussion is to identify the key informant people. Its goal here, the breadth of understanding, not the representativeness. So the size can vary depending on the complexity, and we said it can be from 6 to 12 when we do mini focus group discussion. For classical group discussion, this number can go beyond 15. There is types of sampling, and you need to know them, and very important to keep into account. The most common one is the non-probability sample, which are rarely representative of the target population, but are convenient and economical. And therefore, most of the time, when we do focus group discussion sampling, we use the non-probability sampling. We look at the convenience sampling. We do also snowballing sampling, which is simply the word of mouth via somebody. We avoid the quota sampling, but we do also purposive sampling for focus group discussion. Anything related to probability sampling, whether it's random sampling, cluster sampling, or systematic, this brings us more on the side of quantitative research methods, and therefore it's not used when we do focus group discussion. So the red-colored sampling techniques are the most common, and they are advised to use as sampling technique. I personally advise you to do the purposive sampling or the convenience sampling, if not the snowball, because the snowball, it depends on the knowledge of the people, and it's not always easy to do. It takes a lot of time. Now, snow sampling method is especially for vulnerable or marginalized, difficult to reach participants. It's very important when you have a social phenomena or a specific phenomena and people are not allowed to talk, or they are associated with shame, guilt, security problems. In this sense, snow sampling is the best, because if there are people who are victims in a certain context, this is the only way to make sure that you can create a sample that is relevant to your question. You need also to advertise for your focus group discussion, and this will take time, effort, and you need to recruit people. Stakeholders and community organization can help you with that. In any local community, in any scientific, professional, political or social community or human community, simply you will find organizations, seek them and ask them how they can help you to get in contact with the stakeholders. There's also opportunistic sampling strategies, which are already existing groups and you build on them. So you recruit 1 or 2 respondents extra. And the contact here, you explain the aim, benefits, think about incentives, and ask contact details and follow up. So this is also a kind of opportunistic sampling. For example, we did opportunistic sampling for a focus group discussion one time, that there was a workshop already talking about a certain topic in a conference, in a session, and we talked to the moderator and we asked them to turn it into a focus group discussion and use it to publish the outcomes of this work and identify the findings in relation to our research question. And this was an opportunistic sampling. So we used an existing group that already convened for a specific workshop. We aligned our research question with this workshop, and finally we came up with new findings, and we published these findings. Don't forget saturation and heterogeneity as 2 important terms when it comes to sampling. Saturation is the point at which no concept emerges from the data. So I should stop with my focus group discussions, creation, and discussions when I reach saturation. Heterogeneity depends on the context, but heterogeneity in statistics means that your population sample or results are different. It depends on your context. If you are doing a research where looking at heterogeneity, then when you recruit people, you make sure that they are represented in a heterogenic way. If you are doing a research and we are seeking homogeneity, then you will recruit people with this in mind. The most important that you identify those 2 parameters in your sampling strategy when you are developing or creating your research method, so that you make sure that you are aware about them and you have a purpose when you work. Now, homogeneity within a focus group can be comfortable for respondent. It increases the group dynamics. How? In terms of demographic characteristics, you will have a homogeneity of gender, age, race, ethnicity, education, experiences, and services. So this will be very rich. And this is for homogeneity. For heterogeneity across different focus group, to compare the different groups of respondent and their perspective. So it will be your choice. Either you say I want to have a homogeneous sample, or I want to have a heterogeneous sample. It depends on your context. You want to have people from different varieties on the topic, or you want to have experts in this area who know about it. In my case, most of the time I go for homogeneous sampling, because I talk most of the time when I do focus group discussion, I do it with experts. But if you are talking about focus group discussion with locals about a certain social phenomena, it's better to go for heterogenic sampling. So it's very important to keep that in account. When we talk about the number of participants as part of our sampling approach, we can have small groups, 4 to 6, we can have 7, 12, we can have even more than 15. But in general, small groups, you can go for high emotional involvement. People can start to cry even, and you can go in depth because they are little group. Participants are expert. You can go for controversial themes. You can look at complex problems, and the more here is to get details and stories. When you do bigger groups, you are looking at lower involvement. You are looking at brainstorming, broad exploration of the themes. So here we are looking at understanding in general the topic on a higher level, or less, not a deep, but a higher level of depth. 3 to 5 as a rule of thumb could be a good way to decide how many focus group I need, because don't think that it will be only one focus group. It will be 1, minimum 2, preferably 3. So 3 to 5 is the best practice. The saturation theory, don't forget it. Like we said before, it occurs when additional information no longer generates new understanding. And here I can stop my focus group discussions. I don't need to do 15, 10, 8, it depends. Once I reach saturation with a minimum of 3, it's fine. Still, I'm getting more insights, I continue doing more focus group. The more heterogeneity among your participants, the more groups you will need to total your work. So if you have homogenic groups, therefore I prefer them, you can have less focus group discussions. You can have 3, fine, and you stop. But if you have a heterogenic saturation or heterogenic group recruitment from the beginning, you'll need to have at least 5 groups for your focus groups. As many sessions as required to provide a reliable answer to your research question. This is related mainly to the heterogeneity question. Now, never forget to describe always the context of the people you are interviewing or you are discussing with, and that's what I told you before. You can make a short survey. They answer it before they arrive or during the focus group discussion event to make sure that you know the context of the people and the invited members of your focus group. Now I'm done with the methodology and the data collection and how to sample for focus group discussion. Let's talk about how to analyze the data. Analyzing the data here is very similar to the content analysis techniques. If you watch the video on content analysis and the video on in-depth interviews, it's very similar, because we will transcribe all the text or all the recordings that we have into text, and we will start here to do deep content analysis. Transcription is the first step. We look at data entry and storage. Make sure that you have an audio and handwritten data transcription, and it should be typed. It's very important to transcribe all the data to assure the validity of your work. Transcription are necessary because notes are likely to bias the data, and depending on the subject, it could include non-verbal cues. So transcription will be the first step to do. Number 2, you will get familiar. After you transcribed your focus group discussion recordings, you start to get familiar, you start to read them. So simply you get the whole interviews and the whole data you had from the discussion in the text, and you start to read it. So read and reread and re-listen to what was said in the focus group discussion. Then comes the third step of coding and categorization, and here you start to segment the content and you divide the data into meaningful analytical units. You start with coding, marking the segments of data with symbols, descriptive words, or category names, and keep the continually developing the master list during the coding. So you create the codes, the most important items, topics, themes, concepts that correspond to the research question. You group them under categories, and you keep checking your coding approach all the time, reiterative way, until you find the most satisfactory coding and categorization. Coding simply is finding the words, putting the word, associating certain terms, certain words with a specific terminology, and then you categorize them, and after that you do a selective process where you select only the most important terms and the most important codes and categorize them. So you select the main codes in this step. You can use software to help you with that. I advise you to use Atlas T, for example. It's a coding software that can help you to code the data, and finally you can create a framework of understanding. As you can see, these are codes that are extracted from the body of the text that are simply the transcripts of the focus group discussion, and here are some quotations even that I can extract. I can extract quotations from a focus group discussion. It's not only from interviews or only from content analysis. After I'm done with coding and categorization and I inserted the data in the software, I can go develop an analytical framework. The analytical framework is simply by building a theory and creating a structured vision of my understanding on the topic. So this is very important. Developing an framework involves categories, themes, subcategories, and it's very important with having subcategories in your framework so that the framework reflects the summary and the conceptual understanding of what was discussed in these focus group discussion in regard to the answered questions of the people who participated. Now, to develop an analytical framework, you need to choose the right set of codes. In case of a teamwork, coding can be done in a teamwork or independently. You can have all coding transcript from your analytical framework, and set of the code is never final. You can always iterate. So you code first transcript, set of second transcript, and you start to adapt your codes. And when we say first transcript, can be focus group 1, focus group 2, until you have an adapted code that works with all the focus groups. Okay, now applying the analytical framework, you need to have an indexing for your transcript using the categories and code, and then you can, from this codes all over, you build up your framework. This is an example for a framework where you can see we have different quotations, we have different codes, and we start to group them under a certain framework to make sense and to group the ideas in logical arguments. This is an example for a framework, and this is an example for codes or quotations, and these actually should be the findings, the total outcomes of your work. You are not doing a focus group discussion just to come up with some quotations. Thank you, that's a good thing. But the more important is to go in a higher level of analytical analysis by providing a framework that synthesizes and groups these ideas that were explained during your focus group discussions, minimum 3, and to group them under a framework or a conceptual framework. Now, the interpretation of the data can go beyond the description of the cases and reasons of emergence of phenomena. You have to identify the areas that are not working in your coding. It's worth to note that the stage often takes longer time when you start the interpretation, and you have to create a summary and synthesis, and you have to create a report with including all these focus group discussions outcomes, and you should support your analysis with explicit and grounded arguments. Finally, the reporting, you have to have a purpose to report your views of the group, not to generalize. So you just say what are the people in these groups are talking about. You need to have a statement of the problem and the key questions that you use during the process of focus group discussion. You need to show the results and the findings, summary of the themes that were identified, the key findings, your framework, and use the quotations. And finally, you can have a discussion section, if you like, to link back the research questions and integrate them with the literature review that was done prior to the focus group discussion. Investigate the limitation of your study and the subjectivity and the nature of the subjectivity of your work, the implementation of your finding on policy, on practice, and further research that need to be conducted. By that, you can report and end up your focus group discussion. We are heading almost to the end. Let's talk now about the validity. How can I validate my work? As I told you, our work in qualitative research methods is by default subjective. But what we try to do is to avoid bias. Now, there is two approaches to check validity: internal validity and external validity. It's difficult to check the external validity because we cannot generalize the outcome of a focus group discussion. But we can provide and share insights, and therefore we focus more on the internal validity. Now, we ask ourselves, how can we assure the quality of our approach and the rigor during doing our approach? First of all, we look at credibility. So we ask ourselves, is the topic worthy or not? And is the problem description relevant to the literature and existing research? This needs to be identified when you do focus group research, decision-based research publications. You need to look at the sincerity. You need to look at the significant contribution of this work that you are doing and your paper you want to publish. How was your rigor in your approach of conducting the focus group discussion, and how you were descriptive and transparent? And you need to look at the truth value of what you are doing. So these are all values that you need to look at when you are doing focus group discussion to make sure that it is a credible work. There are some credibility strategies like looking at the social desirability bias, like the silent majority. You will find a lot of people during the focus group discussion that have a majority that is silent. They are not talking. So you have always to check that. Do people mean what they say? You need to look at rich, thick description, and you need to stimulate that people talk. You need also to have a structural coherence. Is the topic list of your focus group discussion corresponding to the research questions, or you have something totally irrelevant? And this is very important, and here comes the role of the moderator. And you need to look at discussion techniques that reframe the question all the time to make sure that the participant understood the question and they're really providing answers that correspond to the question. A lot of people talk, but they do not provide answers to the questions that were proposed from the beginning during the focus group discussion and in relation to the question. So it's important here to check these items. You can look at the note-taking transcripts that were done by the moderator assistants. Reflexivity, you can look at establishing researcher authority. Member checking, looking at other members, get expert to participate with you. Peer examination in the interpretations, look at experts or peer experts in the domain and ask them to check the interpretation that you developed, ask them to check your framework, ask them to check your coding technique. All these are techniques you can debrief with other experts in general. Then you can look at the dependability or the consistency of your work. Is it meaningful or not? And this has to do, is my questionnaire or my questions consistent or not? And this means that you go invest much more time during developing the questions that you will use in the focus group discussion. And you can ask experts to make sure that the questions are well formulated. And here, this can be done stepwise. You can look at well-ordered methodology and stepped, recode the procedure. You can code and recode your work to make sure there is a consistency in the interpretation. You check the peer examination. These are all techniques to increase the consistency of your work, and you can check if there is a consensus or no consensus depending on the situation. Also, you look at the confirmability. The confirmability is simply the neutrality of you as a researcher. The data shaped the findings or you shape the findings. This is very important. How you try to take distance. And when you write your paper, when you write your discussion section and your methodology section, you try to state how you try to take distance and not influence the findings. So there's different techniques for confirmability. You can have external auditor who can identify the audits and the terms. You can have you can have more focus group discussion on the same topic. You can have check how was the relation between the code and the framework. Does it make sense or not? You can check for deep peer debriefing with expert on the outcomes of your focus group discussion. These are all techniques. There is no cookbook for that, but it's up to you who will start always to investigate how can I increase the confirmability of my findings and what did I do to increase it. Now coming to transferability, which will be very difficult in the context of the research because it's qualitative, but still we look at it. Can this be transferred in a way or another? Does the finding apply to other people, other times? Can it give a general understanding? Is the sample in a way representative or not? Can I compare my study with others, with other populations, with other demographics? These are all questions. But in general, there is a checklist when you do a focus group discussion, and I would like to share with you this checklist. You can use it. How was your questionnaire validated? Are the focus group discussion conducted respecting the ethical concerns? How was your coding validated? How were the framework structure validated? How did you ensure the sample heterogeneity and saturation? How did you justify the representation of your focus group sample? The findings are well structured, the proposed framework is novel and provide a new understanding of a new perspective. Is that true? A question to answer. What kind of triangulation technique or techniques of validation, we talked about 4 techniques, did you use to test your research? Is it about transferability, confirmability, reliability, and so on? Now, the takeaway message of this presentation, simply focus group discussions. To succeed with focus group discussion, you need to have a clarity of your purpose from the beginning. You have to have an appropriate environment and physical and social context where you can investigate people and ask them. You need to have sufficient resources to conduct your focus group discussion and all the means related to that, and infrastructure. Financial, human, and physical. You need to have appropriate participants, and your selection process need to be based on serious sampling. You need to have a skillful moderator. You need to have effective questions and validated questions. You need to respect participants and allow them to talk and protect them to allow them to talk. Now the takeaway message today for this: don't forget group size and how many times you will have your focus group discussion, how many groups you will have. So it's a size and how many times you have them, who will be the participants, how I will recruit them, do I have an interview or a guide for my questions during the discussions, how I'm going to recruit, how I'm going to contact people. These are very important questions you need to answer when you do focus group discussions. Focus group discussions, data is qualitative, cannot be generalizable, number one. But it is rich and it provides in a short time a lot of information. Ensure bias is not evident through validation. All the validation items we talked about, you need to master them. You need to read several journal papers that did focus group discussion as a method and learn from them how did they validate their work. Address ethical issues. You must develop your moderation skills, very important, and learn how to contact people. Being neutral, explaining, creating a connection, or getting data out. These are all skill sets that you will need to have when you do focus group discussion. By that, I can say that this is the end of the presentation. Don't forget the previous videos related to qualitative method. This is a presentation that is complementary to in-depth interviews and content analysis. Don't hesitate to watch the whole playlist on videos related to qualitative research method. By that, I would like to thank you and wish you the best of luck with conducting focus group discussion. Thank you very much.